All right, welcome everybody. I will call this meeting to order. Today is May 24th, and this is a special board meeting of our board of directors. And so with that, I will ask for staff to determine if they have a quorum.
Happy to do so, President Houston. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Director Gloria Gray.
Yeah.
Director Harold Williams. Here. Director Desi Alvarez. Here. President Scott Houston.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. We all five are present. So with that, any members of the public wishing to speak?
President Houston, we have not received any requests for public comment at today's meeting. However, this meeting is being held both here in person as well as virtually. If there's anybody here virtually that would like to make a public comment, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. President Houston, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Thank you. All right, moving on to our action calendar. We do not have any items. So item 6 is information calendar. 6A fiscal year 2023-24 budget workshop number 4. So if you'll please carry us on, EJ.
Happy to do so. Thank you very much for joining us here today. I know that our board of directors are extremely busy. So getting everybody here in the afternoon, we greatly appreciate. For the presentation today, we have Margaret Moja, our Executive Manager of Finance, as well as Marianne Rexroad, our Manager of Finance. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. Glad to have you here for us to bring to you our 4th workshop for the fiscal year 23-24. And if I can ask you to turn your attention to the presentation, which begins on page 5 of the title page. But if we can move to page 6, which is our mission statement. As I have shared with you at each and every workshop, that it is important to us to ground ourselves on why we are here by reading our mission statement, which is to provide a safe and reliable supply of high quality water to the communities we serve. As we shared with you, we have been meeting with you for several workshops, the first one being held on March 15th, second one on April 12th, and the third one on May 3rd. And now we're here on our 4th one. Each of those presentations are shared on our website along with the recording. So if anybody has missed any of those workshops along the way, wants to revisit any of those, all that information can be found on our website. But for today, if I could turn your attention now to page 7 of the presentation, it is our workshop agenda. I thought we could start again just because this is sort of the culmination of where we have been and thought we would sort of recap, if you will, some of the budget drivers and some of the discussions that happened at the previous workshops. We will then move into sort of a high level view of our expenses and our revenues, followed by some follow-up questions as it relates to our 5-year CIP and funding. We wanted just to share with you rate scenarios and our 5-year forecast and what that looks like for us. As I've shared with you in the past, the workshop that we have or the budget that we're looking at is always a good thing to look at, not only for this year, but the years that to come and how we are making decisions today and how they impact us into future years. And then finally to our next steps, which is we're hopefully, towards the end of that workshop period of time, we do have some scheduled time next week with our customers to come join us, and then a June consideration by the board of directors. So with that, let me move us on into the presentation onto page 9. As I shared with you, there are a lot of things going on with the district right now. Under water sales, we've got how much are we going to invest in conservation, our water demand variability, and our source water quality. Each of those have had an impact, continue to have an impact, and has been some of the decisions that we will make as we looked at what are our determination for our water sales. Under rates and charges and other revenues, we wanted to understand sort of our rate philosophy, the financial metrics around that, and make sure that, again, we have that 5-year focus. Focusing also on our other revenues that include grant opportunities and also what may occur as a result of looking at our water rates. Under our capital investment and operational expenditures, again, we wanted to make sure that as we continue to the district, we are meeting the water quality levels of service to our customers in all areas, but specifically as it relates to our operations in the water system. We also want to make sure that we incorporate the future direction of West Basin's water recycling program. Session at the last workshop that talked about our various technical planning efforts around that effort. So it should be well to some of our time to really focus in on the future of West Basin. And of course, we've had some significant impact on our costs, and namely in our recycled water operations. And that has had an impact, if you will, to the district as it pertains to how we're going to afford those increased costs. And finally, in that last column there, we have our program delivery and staffing levels. In that area, we wanted to make sure that we understand the scope of services that we are providing to our community. Are we're going to continue with the current programs we have? And if we are, what level of support are we able to provide to them? Making sure that we have the resources available to them so that we can make sure that we deliver on that program. And that will come, largely in the areas of our education and our conservation efforts, but certainly it's in other areas as well. And also to just around succession planning, we are a small staff. We have a number of staff here who have been a while. We want to make sure that we're adequately providing that knowledge transfer to the next generation of staff that are here and those into the future to ensure that we continue to meet the demands of the district. So with that, I'll turn you over to the next slide, which is page 10 of the workshop presentation. And wanted to just to follow up on our May 3rd workshop. What we heard and what we are trying to incorporate into this presentation is around these areas here. So first was around technical planning. We had some great updates provided by our Executive Manager of Engineering Operations around our technical planning efforts to focus in on the future of West Basin's recycling water. And the question was asked, is there any external contributions that we can be seeing perhaps towards those efforts? We said that we'd be partnering with other regional partners such as Metropolitan, with WRD or City of Los Angeles. If they are going to be partnering with us, is there a cost share? So we'll have an update for you on that. We've also had some discussion at the past workshops around staffing. And so we've come to a place where we had an initial recommendation. We've come back to you and said we still like to consider or have the board consider adding 2 additional positions here. One is an executive assistant, and the second is the public information specialist. That second one is one that we had a few years ago, but we have not budgeted for the last couple of years. We're just asking to put the budget back for that particular position. We were also asked to provide you some information regarding the funding sources for our CIP, so we'll share you what that information is. And then from that, of course, we wanted just to provide you an update on that draft financial summary. What does it look like for fiscal year 23-24? And again, for that 5-year period of time. And because of the number of discussion points that we've had here, and I know there's been concern about what our rates could be, we are providing you some rate scenarios. So we have 3 for you. The original 10% that we have shared with you, something less at 7%. And then we've also shown you what a 0% looks like, so that you have a sort of a sense of sort of what are the options, if you will, or the bandwidth that's there. And if there's another one to consider, we would certainly love to hear from you. So we will have that towards the end of the presentation. To page 11 of the presentation, we have just wanted to share with you that we have still incorporated the previous board feedback, which was the Smart Landscape program. We had included it while we were pending notification on the grant funding. We still have not heard if we have received that. So all of those costs have been removed. That would be for consultants and advertising costs. And again, if that is successful for us, that you could see that coming back to the board for your consideration on that. We did remove the funding for a classification and compensation study as well as the succession planning. We also reduced the funding towards the strategic business plan consultant. We reduced the number of proposed staffing positions. And we also reduced some programmatic costs within the water policy and resource development budget. So before I turn it over to Mary Ann on the next section, just to kind of share with you what are the new numbers with all of those decision points, I thought I'd just pause here to see if there was any additional feedback or comments that you would like to share. And then we can, like I said, go into the numbers itself.
Anyone? Go ahead. Thanks, Mark.
right. Good afternoon, President Houston, members of the board. As Mark mentioned, I will take over the next two sections, the first one being on the expenses. So if I could ask you to turn to your packet page 13. This is the proposed expenses as compared for 2024 as compared to 22-23. As Mark mentioned, this is a high level view. A couple things I just want to mention in here. We'll get into some more details in the following slides. The one item to note on this particular slide is that we did incorporate the 7.3 million of the one-time revenues as an expenditure here because we will be using those funds towards the PV lateral project. And then if I could ask you to turn to the following page, page 14, we'll look at what those water purchases look like, the imported water purchases. Again, comparing fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 or the proposed fiscal year 23-24. Just as a reminder, we had brought some analysis to you in the first workshop about our projected water sales. And so you see we've included that 95,000 still here in our proposed budget for the retail side. For the barrier sales we have under the Dominguez Gap, we have a total of 2,000 that we've included in the budget. And then for the Dominguez, for the West Coast barrier, we've anticipated 5,000 acre feet being injected into that barrier. And you can see then the total of those three components equal to about 125.6 million. The last part of the imported water purchases is the MWD RTS that we're obligated to pay. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in the following slides. So I'll just pause there to see if there's any questions on this particular slide.
Any questions?
Let's move on to page 15. As I mentioned, we're going to get into a little bit more detail. And so on page 15, I know you've seen this slide before in previous workshops, but I did want to bring it to your attention just to remind you, we do have an obligation to Metropolitan Water District for the capacity charge. If you look to the numbers on the left-hand side, you will see that West Basin for the next fiscal year has an obligation to pay $2,378,380. That is computed based on what our peak is over the last 3 years. So for last calendar year 23, our peak was 218.2 CFS. That did not change for calendar year 24. Also keep in mind that the way this is calculated, we take 6 months of 23 and 6 months of 24 to get to what West Basin includes in the budget. Right, moving on to page 16. Again, this is a high level view of what our operating program expenditure summary is. But I did want to note that, I know you've seen these numbers, but they have been updated as Margaret indicated for the items that we've shared in previous workshops. Also wanted to make sure that if you needed any more information or detail, we have included those slides starting on page 44 with the water, recycled water operations program all the way through page 52 through the Title 22 monitoring program. So if there's any questions, we can take a look at any of those slides. But again, these numbers incorporate everything that Margaret had just mentioned a few minutes earlier.
Director Alvarez.
Water use efficiency and conservation. And I know it's on page 45 and 46. Just go over some of the highlights of the increases. Like, for example, on the rebates, we're going to increase that by $265,000.
Yes. So I think you're referring to the grass removal program.
Right.
That was based on what they're seeing this year and the popularity of the program. And there are some grant funds coming through to help offset that cost.
With an increase in the.
Then there is consultants for the partnership with Las Virgenes. What is that? That's 150,000.
Oh, that's a new program. Again, that's in partnership with Las Virgenes. The details, I'm not sure if Gus is here, but EJ, do you want to expand on that?
Well, we do have Matt here, and I know that Gus will be joining us here in a minute. Director Alvarez, it's important to note that when we actually go out and get a grant, and this program is completely funded through an integrated regional water management grant, the grant funds that we get are actually split. West Basin provides a staff time as far of our share. Las Virgenes would do the same, as would City of Malibu, and of course, LA County Water Works 29. But they do hire a consultant with those grant dollars to manage the program. And so a portion of that goes towards the consultant, and a portion of it goes to all of the fixtures and devices that they'll be distributing. And Matt, I don't know if you have any specifics as to the grant itself, but I know it's roughly 670,000. 30.
That goes to both kind of the whole program, not just West Basin, but it covers our.
$630,000 program,
Yes.
and out of pocket, it costs us $150,000.
No,
No.
it's completely grant funded.
So that $150,000 there is gonna be completely grant funded.
Yes.
And just to remind you all, we show the expenses and expenses, and we show the revenues and revenues. So it's not offset. For the purpose of the here, we want to make sure that you understand that it's in both places.
When we get to the revenue section, we'll see that in there.
What exactly is that grant for? What does it do?
So as EJ Ken said, we hired a project manager to oversee the program. Very similar to the Malibu Topanga Smart program that we ran previously. So there's a DM who manages it. And then there's the direct installations that we do. So there's the irrigation controllers and other efficient devices that is the case for the installation, the labor.
So it's a water conservation program to reduce basically water through improve, not through the reduction or changing the landscaping, but through improvements in the irrigation system.
Right.
Director Alvarez, we have Gus Meza here, who's a project manager on that. And again, this is a project that was applied for. I think the lead proponent of the application is Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. But with the help of Gus Meza, we've partnered with them. And maybe you could just touch on the different components of that and the full grant.
Good afternoon, Director Support. Director Alvarez, your last question there about the turf. LA County, as part of this project, LA County Water Works, they're providing an additional $2 per square foot. That's their funding. And so there'll be a $5 rebate for grass removal in the Malibu and Topanga area.
Trash removal program I'm talking about, or is this the
Yeah.
same thing? This
Yeah,
is
that'll be
the-
one part of this new project, this new joint project with Las Virgenes and Waterworks. It's a three-way partnership that we formed in the Malibu area. And we received a $630,000 grant. And Las Virgenes will be the lead agency. But West Basin and Waterworks are also partners in this project. So like Matt had mentioned, it has several components. We're installing smart sprinkler controllers. There's a rebate, a $5 per square foot rebate. There's a garden in a box type of component. And so it has cisterns and rain barrels. So it's pretty comprehensive. And like you mentioned, Director Alvarez, it's focused for outdoor water conservation.
And Director Alvarez, if I could just add one piece, because I heard what you just said about the grant or the grass replacement dollars. This is what I would call a true partnership and something that I would like to see throughout our service area. In this case, Metropolitan Water District would be providing $2 per square foot. Then West Basin Municipal Water District would be providing $1 per square foot. And then LA County Water Works 29 would be providing an additional $2. We're commingling that into one pot, so every applicant would get that full $5 per square foot.
Just the way it's presented. Fantastic.
I just want to mention, sorry, Alvarez, just I want to mention that our share is fully funded by the grant. No West Basin funding.
No.
I think that one has been discussed in PI. The PI committee is where this one has been talked about.
That is correct. And we'll be putting together some information for the board, but the Department of Water Resources just announced the award on integrated regional water management funding. Greater LA County was fully funded. So this program, we do now have notification that this program is fully funded.
In the PI meeting, probably telling us more details on that. right?
Correct.
Perfect. All right. Anything else, Director Alvarez?
Not on that one.
Anybody else?
Yeah, before-
Director Williams.
Before you go on, I just want to mention to everyone that I'm having a terrible time hearing complete statements because I'm in competition, or you're in competition with this
Air conditioner.
air conditioning delivery system right here. It blows directly out and makes a noise that drowns out speaking voices. So if you could, keep in mind that if you want me to hear what's going on, you got to speak up. If you don't want me to know what's going on, you just carry on.
Yes. Okay, our next portion.
Okay. So
Oh, yes.
If we're gonna
Director
move to another slide, let's stay on this one for a
Sure.
while. All right, I want to move to the technical planning. On that one, for budgeting $1 million for the Hyperion TMBR pilot study.
yes, that's the project share that we had discussed previously. We have paid $1 million to date to LA for that particular project. We have accrued 2.3 million. And so in this current budget, 23-24, we are only bringing the total up to the original contract that was about 4.3 million was West Basin share. So that makes up the difference between those components.
Okay, I may come back to this, something that we need to reconsider. But I want to remind everybody, when we signed that TMBR agreement, we gave them $1 million. And then there was a commitment for future, and they can even come back. The agreement's expired, but they have come back and asked for substantially more because the whole project keeps on growing. And as of this point, we do not have any agreement with them. So our financial obligation is really capped at that first 1 million. And out of it, depending on what we decide to do, just maybe out of the goodness of our hearts, we may write them a check for another 1 million, but we might want to think about this later on, when we're talking about rates.
Director Alvarez, if I could just touch on that for 1 second. You probably recall that LADWP has provided us with a letter asking us to find solution on a number of different issues. They gave us a timeline as far as the solution goes, and I believe that's at the end of August. I met with LADWP earlier today, and we had some, I think, very fruitful discussions. This was one of the items that was discussed, whether we wanted to allow them to move forward without West Basin, or what value we could bring to the table, and of course, what value the MBR pilot project would provide to West Basin. So I will be presenting that to the board at the best time. But I do think that it is a good idea to include it or incorporate it into this budget. We may not pay that out, as you just mentioned, but I think it's worthwhile showing that we're open to the idea of paying that money.
We have a whole series of items for the city of Los Angeles, of which that is only one.
Correct.
Anything else? Director Gray, I know you're there. Did you also have any questions? Or you?
No, but
Go ahead.
thank you, Director. I thought I'd lost you guys, but no, I'm still here. Thank you.
Oh, okay,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
Thanks.
All right, okay, we'll come back.
All right, good for now. Moving on.
Um, Let's turn to page 17 of the packet. We've been previously asked to not only share our program expenses by the program, but also to show it by, say, major account or category. And so that's what this slide does here on page 17. It takes each one of those major account categories, and you can see side by side the fiscal year 22-23 budget as compared to the proposed 23-24 budget. I won't go into details. I think we've talked about many of the components in prior workshops. But again, if there are any questions about how those numbers are put together within those slides in the back, we have included those presentation categories. So we can always turn to that to say, okay, what's included in consultants, Mary Ann? You can go back to the individual programs themselves, and then we've highlighted the categories within each of those programs.
No question, just a comment that a lot of the drivers here, there are drivers here that are within our control. There are drivers here that are not. The biggest one being chemicals, and the overall operation of the recycling water system. That, those are the biggest increases in costs overall.
And just to reiterate, yes, we absolutely agree with you that the drivers of our recycled water system, specifically those variable costs such as chemicals, electricity, sludge hauling, really is dependent upon, first of all, the sales that we may have, but also we are seeing, like I said, significant increases in our chemical costs. Some chemicals have gone up 40% year over year. And so we are seeing a significant sort of impact to this budget, and that is what has caused pressure on this year's budget. And if those amounts stay the same, it can also cause pressure into next year. Hopefully they will trail back, but we don't know that. And so certainly that's one of those considerations that we've looked at. That chemicals is a major factor, and we certainly wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. I also do want to just mention to you that these chemical costs that we have here does reflect those actions that were just taken by the board this past week. And it does show those prices. Most of those contracts are actually only for 6 months. So depending upon how those prices come in towards the end of the year, we may be coming back to you to see if we need to adjust the budget or not to reflect that. So just wanted you to be aware of that.
Thanks for that, Margaret, because and just need a little further clarification. So the budget for chemical projects through the end of the year with a possibility that it may not cover it, depending on what the numbers come in December for the second half.
So we've made some assumptions, yes. There's a number of factors, of course. Sales is one of it, your dosage requirements, because of your water quality that you get in, and of course the pricing. Each of those factors are there. So, I guess my point is that if we see another 10-15% increase, come for the second half of the year, yes, that might be something that we have to consider.
So based on the contracts we just awarded for this first half of the fiscal year, what percentage increase are you assuming for the second half? That they'll go up by 3% or 10% or what percent?
Or Marco, either one.
We have our resident expert here.
So the budget included for chemical is based on the pricing that we got for the 6 months contract. And the dosage is based on our dosing rates. And then depending on the sales that we projected, it may or may not go up. So
We not assume an increase from first 6 months to the second 6 months.
yeah, we did not
So you're assuming you're gonna get the same,
Same
at
price.
this point, yes.
good risk to take. The other question I had on that, is a pretty significant increase, is consultants. Either direct me to what page lists those consultants, or explain to me how we're going up, $1.7 million if you saw.
Absolutely. So in the consultant line item that you see there, one of the big factors of that is within the technical planning portion of it. And I'll just tease you to the next page, which is, we have a 3.3, which includes that $1 million that you talked about with the LA or the project share. So you've got, call it $2 million there for cost there. So we're seeing an increase in cost there, but we are hoping to have contributions from external parties, if you will, towards that. So it actually starts to bring that, if you were to offset that revenue portion that's there, and again, that portion in revenue is not against the expenses, but that shows you that we're, right about the same number once you take those into consideration. So the majority of it is coming from technical planning. There are other places that go up, other places that go down, but if you want to just point one place.
Page 50. Most of that, not all of it, just technical planning doesn't add up to the 5.84, it only adds up to 5.21. The biggest number that I saw increase there is the regional recycled water feasibility studies, where we're spending over $1 million more for consultants. What are we doing?
So if I can maybe, let's turn our attention to page 18. I think that will just share that there. We did group them all within the in the summary page, if you will, in the back, but it gives you in greater detail here. And this is what was provided in greater detail at last month's workshop. So with that, I'll turn it back to Marianne for her comments.
So yes, thank you, Margaret. So on page 18, what we did based on the feedback that we received at the last budget workshop, we provided a schedule here, which it outlines each one of those major efforts within the technical planning budget, what we had budgeted for either the project share or the consultants we anticipated. And then as Margaret said, we then looked at what our potential or estimated external contributions can be. But that line item of $1,025,000 is not shown against the expenses. So we showed the expenses gross, and in this case, this $1 million is showed under our other revenues in our revenue side. If you need more information about each one of these projects, we do have Barkev here who is ready to share that information if you'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, if you can expand a little bit more, and I'm going to jump back and forth because I looked at this between pages 17, 18, and 15.
Can I make one other point real quick before Barkev gets in? So to answer your specific question regarding what's in regional recycled water feasibility studies, consultants, $1,595,000. If you go to the fourth line where it starts with regional recycled water hydraulic analysis, all the way down to West Coast Basin IPR study, all of those are the sub-projects under that regional effort there. And so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 sub efforts, if you will. And again, Barkev can go into the detail, but I want to just explain how we group the numbers, trying to put it all
Yeah,
together.
you stole my thunder.
I'm so sorry,
It's okay.
but that's what I do with numbers. So
Initially, Dr. Alvarez and board, we had one study to look at so many different aspects of the future of West Basin. We said we wanted to do a series of feasibility studies this year. Kind of took the big study and broke it down into pieces. And we said the reason why we did that is twofold. One, we'd like to spread the work around and get as many proposals as possible from different companies and make sure that we're getting best value for the analysis. Two, we felt like we have stakeholders that be interested in one part of the analysis here and a different stakeholder interested in another part of the analysis here. And so these different stakeholders may contribute funds towards the analysis. So that's the reason why in the attachment, it's all lumped into one. But in the presentation, you'll see that is divided into 7 different studies. Yeah, it starts off with the regional recycled water hydraulic analysis, number 4 over there in the table.
Yeah.
And goes down all the way to the West Coast Basin IPR study.
Yeah, but on page 51, you segregated that separate. It's not one for the others.
Sorry, the
West Basin.
You're right.
So when I'm talking about that big increase in consultants, which is at the bottom of the regional recycled water feasibility study, is the last section on page 50. We're going from 400,000 to 1,000,006.
My apologies. The regional recycled water feasibility study is broken down into the 6 studies. And then the West Basin IPR study is on there on its own line item.
Okay, 630. The recycled water hydrology analysis, you're not showing any cost on page 18.
We just have staff time towards it.
So really it's the other 5 that are adding up to that.
Correct.
And in 50% matching revenues for it.
Yeah, we did,
Revenue section.
for most of these studies, we had 50%. There was one, we assumed 100%, and one we assumed 75%. Based on our discussions we've had with stakeholders so far.
100% would be the hydraulic analysis.
Correct.
The others are all 50% based on this.
With the exception of one, we assumed that the Etsy little, yeah, we assumed 75% on that one from a stakeholder.
Yeah, I want to just point out that I mentioned it earlier that the Hyperion NPR study stands alone there. That's $1 million. Okay. Thank you.
Nora, please.
So we move on. Okay, so on page 19, just wanted to again bring back the labor and benefits that we're proposing for fiscal year 23-24. You had heard Margaret mention that we had previously included a number of positions for the board to consider adding. We pared that back to the 2 that we felt were important to include, to be able to provide the services that we're being asked to provide. And so the numbers you see in the fiscal year 23-24 proposed numbers here do include not only those positions, it includes the CPI increase that we have through December, which was 7.5%. We also did update the numbers for any recent information about staffing changes, any changes that have occurred through like recent hires and things like that, where we know what their salary is. We made all those changes. So this is very, very current. And I'll just highlight one other thing with the benefits. When we looked at all, again, the positions and the levels of the positions and the benefits, we were able to decrease that percentage. And I think I've mentioned that before, from 78.5% down to 78.5 to 75.4%. So one good news story there. But I'll pause here to see if there's any questions before we move on.
I have questions for Tom. First one is on the 7.5% increase. Just so that I understand these, I think I asked this question last time and now I see it again and I see it a little bit different. I'm not quite sure I understand it correctly. We're budgeting 7.5% increase across the board for all employees.
With the exception of someone who may have recently received a promotion, or if there is an intern, they are not budgeting any sort of an increase on it.
Interns aside, for purposes of the budget, you're budgeting across the board 7.5%.
Right, it's a pool, it's a merit pool. No one is guaranteed the 7.5%. It's a pool that's put together, and then after the managers, the general manager goes through and determines based on how the employees perform, then those allocations may or might not use the entire pool.
If somebody went in really real simple and said, I'm just gonna, we got 7.5% for everybody, then everybody could get a 7.5% increase, increase in salary. That'd be one way to interpret that. Okay, so it is 7.5% across the board for everybody. The way it's administered is that then it's based on merit. Some employees may get 0 rate increase in salary, and others may get 2%, and others may get 10%. As long as all of it stays within that 7.5, whatever percent.
That's correct. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Some employees may get merit increases above the 7%. Theoretically, some employees may get no merit increases, and some may get 10% increase.
That's within the realm of possibilities,
Yeah.
certainly.
Right. So it is the way I understood it, but when I read it this time, and maybe it's a little bit different. Okay. So it's a completely discretionary.
Right, a decision was made by the board several years ago when there was a class in comp on how to address merit, future increases for staffing. And it was determined that it was going to be on a merit base only, no cost of living increases. And so when the determination is made to come up with what that merit pool should be, we have though said, well, how are we going to assess that? And so we have looked at it then, like I said, on a historic basis. We've looked at it on a calendar year basis. So we looked at calendar year, the one that just completed, which is 2022. What is the CPI change from year over year, which was 7.5%. And then that's what we carried forward into what would be the increases to put into the fiscal year 23-24. And all of that is done with an effective date of July 1, 2023. And as Mary Ann mentioned, if you're on probation because you're a new hire or a promotion, those will not take an effect until you reach your 1-year probation.
So then going back to the overall labor pool, we're going, if we approve this budget, it includes going from 50 FTEs to 52. What is the cost of those 2 positions?
My recollection is around a little over 200,000. I think the merit pool is a little over 400. So yeah, right about, I can't do math in my head. I need a calculator, but I think that's what I recall, about 400 for merit pool and about 200 for the couple staffing positions.
The 2 positions would cost us fully loaded, 200.
Fully loaded, no, it'd be slightly more. I was just giving you the payroll portion of it.
Payroll.
Yeah.
So multiply it by about 1.89.
1.75, Mary Ann said. So, yeah. Maybe 300,000, 350 or something like
So
that.
it'd be about 350,000.
I can get you a better number. Like I said, I'm doing them back of the calculation.
And this budget then also assumes that we will keep the assistant general manager.
That is correct. We have on the org chart, we didn't bring it forward for you, but right. But the one that we had from last one is the one with the 2 positions. That's the one that is with the org chart looked the same as that, as presented in workshop number 3.
Would you like a copy that we can?
No, I have it from the
Okay.
previous version.
Okay.
Just not in this version. That's
And
okay.
and I wanted to clarify
I
one
have my
thing.
notebooks.
Okay, I wanted to clarify one thing too. As Margaret said, those 2 positions, one of the positions we're not including in this fiscal year 23-24 to start right away. There's a hiring process, as you're aware, and so we have scheduled for that person to start later in the year. Just to
But
clarify.
once you hire him, you're gonna step.
Exactly, for future years.
So it's net 2 positions and includes the AGM.
That's correct, yes.
Okay,
Go ahead. All right, so that concludes our expense section. And if we could then move forward to our revenues. Let's start on page 21 of your packet. This slide probably looks familiar because it just looks like what we shared with our expenses, except we're breaking down our revenues under this slide. A couple of things I wanted to point out. I think you heard Margaret say earlier that we're going to present some other scenarios. This particular scenario that we're showing here is including not the 10% that we had shared last time around, but this is now included a 7% adjustment to your reliability service charge. And then later in the presentation, then we'll go through those other scenarios. So just wanted to clarify that. If there's any questions on this, or shall I move on?
well, this is the scenario you're recommending.
This is the scenario recommending. So we'll go through those numbers in a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. And then, as Margaret mentioned, she will go through the other two scenarios.
So before we leave this, I think we'll cover it in the other slides too, but on the recycled water sales and the standby charge, which are the two revenues that go to offset the recycled water operations. The standby charge is what it is.
Correct.
Okay. Just adopted the resolution to set the tax for the next year. The recycled water sales, you're showing that revenue is going to go up. That's based on increased volumetric.
Oh, I have a slide on that. Shall we move to that slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would, let's move on to, okay, that slide, if you would turn to page 28 of your packet, and hopefully this will answer your question, Director Alvarez. 22-23, we did budget 32,643 acre feet. For 23-24, it's slightly more, so it's relatively flat. We budgeted 33,032 acre feet. So it's not totally due to the change in the acre feet, but what's included in here as far as the rates is that we do pass through any adjustments based on the agreements that we have with our different customers. And that we also make an adjustment to the disinfected tertiary customers as well. And those, if you recall, are based on a tier structure. So it's a declining rate. So the more water you buy, the cheaper the rate is. So we've assumed in this particular slide an average rate, because it couldn't show all 5 rates here, but we've shared that previously. So it's more, I would say, with the price of the recycled water, less so on the number of acre feet, since that didn't change too much.
I think last time we had a discussion about, do we keep a declining rate? Do we keep a flat rate, et cetera? And this, when I looked at this, I couldn't quite tell. This is based on assuming a flat rate.
I used an average because, again, some of the agreements that we have do refer to the declining rate. So, we're starting that the study for our costs. And so that'll help us determine, does that structure still make sense? Does it not? Is there a better way for us to allocate our costs to the different rates for the different customers?
I'll also add just to that, a lot of our, I'll say, customers, our cities perhaps, their sales tend to be on the lower end, which means that they get the highest rate. We do have a couple of our more industrial customers that are also on that declining rate structure. And so, of course, they benefit, if you will, from that declining structure. And again, as we negotiate new agreements, as we go through the cost of service, all of that will be evaluated. And we certainly know that has been sort of a legacy thing here to have a declining block structure. And it may not be something that we would have going forward. We felt like, we've made the point that recycled water is valuable, is needed within the service area. And why do we need to entice people to do that? So again, the cost of service is going to really be a benefit to the district to make sure that we are getting an appropriate cost, unit cost to rate comparison.
Non-contract rates. I understand we're upside down on a lot of contracts. I get it. But on the non-contract rate, I'd like to us to get off of the declining rate structure with this budget. Just said it, here's what it is. Title 22 water is gonna be this amount.
We can certainly look at that. I think ultimately in the end, you'll be surprised that it's really actually not that much impact. It's like
Most of the impact
$30,000.
that we have, I
No,
understand.
we can certainly calculate that and
But if we're gonna start going in that direction, that's the only area where we have flexibility and are not contractually bound.
we can certainly calculate what that is and share that.
So, and just so, because I have a hard time hearing too, quite frankly, but can you clarify what exactly you're asking or he's asking so that all of us understand what you're going to recalculate, please?
Perhaps maybe I should share it and make sure
Yeah.
that Alvarez, Director Alvarez, I'm agreeing to it. So we have one of our refinery customers that's on a declining rate structure here. And what he is asking us to do is show him at the highest rate, not at the tiered rate. And so that essentially it would just give us a little bit more dollars towards our recycled water sales, if you will, by showing everybody at the highest rate, not at any other rate.
Margaret, can I?
Yeah, that is accurate. To get rid of the declining rate structure because that was kind of a lost leader. But at this point, on our contractual rates, we have contractual rate and there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
But on the non-contractual rate, that we just go to a fixed rate like we do with our portable water. We don't have an increasing rate structure either, decreasing. We pay the same readiness to surcharge whether you buy 10,000 acre feet or 100,000 acre feet.
So I do get that, but is that what in reality is happening or?
No,
because we're not
that's
changing?
what I'm asking, that when they bring back the final budget, that it be brought back that way. We had that discussion last time, and I think that we talked about that we don't need that anymore. We do need to work on our contractual obligations because we're upside down on those contracts.
So I see EJ wants to say something.
I just want to clarify because I thought what I heard from Director Alvarez, there was one small difference when I heard Margaret repeat it, which is what you want to see is to remove the declining block structure as far as our Title 22, our irrigation water for our customers. Correct? So it wouldn't be tied to the refinery contract. It would be across the board, the declining rate structure.
We would have to tap to legal on that if we can change that structure.
For the Title
We do
22.
have a refinery that does two, actually, that goes off.
Yeah, but the ones that have contractual rates are contractual rates. We know that. I'm talking about the non-contractual rates. So the Title
Yes.
22 water, we can set the rate wherever we want.
But the two that I'm thinking of refer to these rates that are the declining. So I'm not quite sure, like Margaret said, legally, if
Well, I feel like my understanding is that you're setting aside the contractual obligations of West Basin and the non-contractual is what he's referring to as far as the decline line. So that would include our retailer customers for our outdoor irrigation. But we will have that conversation with legal and we'll get an opinion from them and then we can bring it back to see what it looks like for the final adoption.
And I will just tell you, from a quick calculation, if we were to do everybody at the highest rate, and again, that would include the refineries, that would be an additional just under $70,000.
It's not a lot. It's just a shifting of
Right.
how they're going to operate.
Yeah, and of course, and we had certainly have been contemplating that, but knowing that the cost of services upon us, we're like, do we make any changes now at this point? And that was, I think, the consideration that staff had around this topic. So, but certainly happy to provide that information back to the board.
So if I understand that properly too, because this is obviously structured as we currently are without getting to the rate study being accomplished yet. But Director Alvarez, you're looking at it as an option to look at, or just saying we should just change it this budget cycle?
My recommendation is that we should just change it. It's not a big number
Mhm.
because the biggest numbers that we have are all our contractual obligations. That's where your real money's at. If I can put it that way. It's not a big number, $70,000 in the overall scheme here of $46 million is not a big number. But it's to the idea that we're just gonna have everybody across the board, and as we negotiate in the future, et cetera, no, this is our process. And on that one, I don't believe that we should have any legal limitation. You know, we can annually or whenever we want to set rates, we can set rates.
Okay, I understand what he's asking for. Director Williams.
Yes, thank you. I just like to hear the general manager's point of view on this.
My point of view is that declining rate structures are a thing of the past. We're in the business of asking people to reduce their water usage, including outdoor irrigation, including with recycled water. We want them to water or irrigate their landscapes as much as necessary. And so a declining rate structure, the incentive was that if you're utilizing recycled water and you use more, well, then you'd pay less in the long run. We would sell more. But I would say that I don't think there are too many agencies that utilize a declining rate structure any longer.
I'm the one that wants to get out of here soon. But I will give you a little anecdote that I rolled my eyes when I heard this. I will not mention the official, but this is an elected official from my home city of Manhattan Beach. Said, you know, with all that water that we got this year going on, we're out of the drought. No, we're not out of the drought. Yeah, we're out of the drought. Okay, yeah, this year it's a really wet year. Why don't you guys think about maybe lowering the rates so that you can encourage people to water their lawns? We have a lot of yellow lawns and we need to make them green. And instead of letting all that, literally, I'm almost paraphrasing or repeating him verbatim, but I am paraphrasing. Instead of letting all that water go out to the ocean, we should use that water to keep our cities green. This is an elected official. Name withheld.
No choices.
True.
I understand.
Which is why we do have to continue to educate
Educate.
all of them and maybe even their constituents even more so. But on that note, so I understand you'll.
We'll discuss it with legal, and what we'll do is we'll bring it back. As Margaret pointed out, it would not be much in savings, but it would be a policy change for West Basin in the total grand scheme of things. And so we'll look at that and we'll bring it back.
So assuming, let's just suppose there's no legal issue, this is something you would bake into the last or whatever we end up with budget. It
It
wouldn't
will be in the rate.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an either or, option 1 or 2 or whatever. I think it sounds like, I mean, I'm okay with this because it is a very minimal amount. It's not going to shock anybody in the big picture, right? I don't think. Amongst all the other changes that go on, so.
We can be clear certainly when because again, we take the budget and the rates as separate action. And so certainly we will be clear in that it's there. And again, yeah, and I will just ask you, at some point, chicken or the egg, is the budget or the rates first, so because I think that is one that we need to be sure we understand. So, but that, I think Mary Ann's ready to go on to the.
Hold on. But I think that's good. And I think, any objection to that, Director Deere? Objection, Director Gray? The 4 of us are okay with this. Over there.
So the other question I had for you is on the retail water sales.
Can we, hold on, please? Before you leave this slide, I did have a question myself real quick on the recycled water. You have the nitrified Chevron. It looks like the acre feet proposal really going up a lot, unless I'm misreading this.
If you recall that during the 22-23 budget process, we assumed that we were going to do a tank repair.
Yeah.
And so for 22-23, we have reduced the amount of acre feet. For 23-24, it's back to.
Okay, so just bring it back to where it would have been.
That's right.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Problem.
So on the retail water sale,
Slide 22.
yeah,
Okay. Slide 22.
we're basically budgeting for the budget is based on 95,000 acre feet of water sale.
For the retail, yes.
This year, the budget was based on 103,000.
That's right. It included 1,900 acre feet for just what Director Houston had just asked about. We had assumed that we'd have a bump up because of now we would shift to potable water for that particular refinery for the nitrified. 100, yeah, exactly. That's what. So it is a drop.
But at the end of this year, which we're 2 months away in terms of what, knowing exactly what we are, what is our projected water sales?
That's a great question.
We kind of had that, I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
about 91,000
Yeah.
acre feet is what we assumed that we would be towards the end of
How
this
much?
year. 91,000.
This year. So I would next year that we shouldn't be projecting 95,000 acre feet of water sale. We should be projecting what we're selling this year or less. The mantra being water conservation, notwithstanding that we should lower water rates so we can allow people to water their lawns more. That was quite the suggestion that I got. So, because realistically, I understand that, well, it's been a wet year, people are gonna use more water, but that's not the message that needs to be sent out. And I hope we don't see a rebound. I hope that our water sales continue to go down and that conservation continues to be something that has been absorbed in the fabric of our communities.
One other point I will make for the fiscal year that we're currently in, 22-23, and if you recall back in September of 22, we were asked for 2 weeks to reduce our water usage, have no outdoor watering because of the shutdown at Metropolitan Water District. So certainly that has some impact here, not a, hey, let's conserve, I mean, it's conserve water, yes, but it was a more directive, if you will. And we understand your point. I mean, is it, what kind of message do we want to share? Is it 91? Is it 95? I mean, I will say up until like about a month ago, we still thought we could get to 95, or maybe 2 months ago at this point. But yes, I mean, we can certainly do that. I mean, I will tell you that, going down at about another 4,000 acre feet, it would be about
7 million.
about $1 million more in impact on revenues.
I get that, but that's the reality. I don't think we're gonna see the rebound. We live in, most of our communities have taken conservation pretty much to heart, and it has become a fabric. Not every resident here believes in conservation, but most people do. And the reality is, and it's a good thing, that we are using less water. And we need to understand that that's probably where the water sales are gonna be at. And so we should budget realistically.
Understood. And if we make that decision, or the board makes that decision, I should say, there is another $1 million of either revenue increases, i.e. rates, or $1 million in cuts in order to make that happen. Because where we're at today and where we anticipate for, future years, tells us that we need something. I understand 10% might not be tenable, but if you're cutting out $1 million worth of sales, you're going to need to make some bigger choices, which I know is like MBR or something that's around there. So
$1 million, isn't it?
Funny how that.
Amazing.
amazing. It's like you wanted it. No, I'm just kidding. But we will do what the board asks us to do, but those are the questions in front of you, because those are, that's the impact that we have.
So do you have more?
Well, no, I do have a further comment. So this year, our revenues were based on 101,000 acre feet of water sales. We're at 91,000. That's a $10,000 acre foot delta in the negative direction. So our revenues are quite a bit lower. How is that being handled?
Well, we've also seen reduction in our costs as well. In fact,
Except in chemicals
except in chemicals.
and utilities.
Yes. But at the FNA committee meeting, we did share a budget versus actual through March 31st and a projection. And we do feel like we will then make up, if you will, the difference because of the savings that we're seeing in our costs. We also have, there's also is the one-time, well, I shouldn't say one-time, but we have the revenues that we're anticipating because the grants that we have associated with the expansion over at the Carson facility, that will be coming in. And we've been working with the DWR folks to get that.
So at the FNA committee, you did make a presentation of savings in a lot of programs that goes to offset the net loss in revenue. But yet in our new budget projection, most of the programs are maintained at the same level or increase. When they operated and the end result was they could be brought in at a lower amount. Why don't we look at budgeting at what we actually spent as opposed to what we budgeted and increasing it?
We do take that into account, but if you're looking at the biggest drivers again, it's the recycled water program. And I would say the main reasons we were under our budget as far as our expenditures is because we have had low sales. That's primarily, I don't want to repeat what's been said at all the different committee meetings, but we've had water quality issues. We had, at the beginning of the year, the county was restricting how much we could inject into the barrier. So that has reduced sales, therefore reduced costs.
That's to the recycled water side. We're talking about the retail water side. Where we were projecting, we would sell 100,000+ acre feet of imported water. We only sold 91,000 acre feet of imported water, which is a good thing from a societal point of view, but it's a bad thing from revenues. And yes, you did present, and I had looked at that and said, well, there's savings here, there's savings there. These programs operate at the end of the day coming in under budget, which is a good thing. But then as I budget the following year, why don't I budget at what the program actually spent instead of at a higher number?
Look at,
If I
Yeah, go
could
ahead.
actually answer that question, I think, I will say that we don't take last year's budget and say, let's just repeat that number. We ask them to build the budget every year. So you have to tell me what kind of consultants you're using, what kind of programs, efforts you're doing, and sort of where it is. We do push back on them, like, are you sure you're able to get that program out and all that stuff? Some of the savings that we had this year was around our technical planning. We did not move forward on some of those technical planning efforts, and therefore you saw a great amount of savings. However, and that was to use consulting dollars to do that. That being said, this next year, with a lot of staff time put into this year, we were able to sort of construct, if you will, the scope of works to be able to do that kind of work. And so therefore, that's why you're seeing higher numbers there. Same with the efforts around conservation. Oh, we've got this grant that we're going to do with Las Virgenes, so therefore we can build that number in there. So I don't think it is sort of like, let's get to where the numbers are. It's what do we think we can have the capacity to do? And that's how those budgets are built by those project managers and submitted by the department managers.
That is one way to budget.
So I don't know what the other colleagues think. I mean, I understand what Director Alvarez is saying, but on the other hand, even looking at this, we're only looking right now in front of our faces what just happened last year, currently as we speak right now. We're not looking at the 2 or 3 or 4 years back just to see what the trend has been.
It's been declining.
And it's been declining, but I guess, I don't know if we're comfortable with this, the 91 number, or what the number is. I don't know what the magic number is. Yes, I would like to hear you, Jay, but I think staff obviously is recognizing the trend is downward, but I'm a little leery to just put what's the lowest number and hope we make the lowest number. And then if we sell more, then we're looking better off. So that's kind of my thought of this.
And so your alternative is budget for a higher number that you won't reach like we did last year. And if we want to go back to the discussion we had last year, I think I was thinking, 95,000 acre feet might be a better number. We ended up at that 101,000. And at the end of the year, the actual sales, 95,000 was high and 91,000 tends to be right. If we continue, which is, I think, our intent, to promote conservation, et cetera, you're gonna see further reductions in water usage, not increases. And so realistically, when you're budgeting, budget on what you're actually gonna sell. Don't overestimate, and then at the end, have to deal with the fact that we do have savings or we don't, and we're in a shortfall situation.
President Hughes, and the only thing I would add is that the Water Policy and Resources Development Group did have the opportunity to look at this. We do utilize our urban water management plan to kind of look at projected trends as well as increased population. The reality of the 2022 and 2023 water year is something that we'll look back on for quite some time. Never did we anticipate the amount of precipitation that we received locally. And if you look at the green lawns that might have been mentioned in Manhattan Beach, even in the month of May, people were not watering their lawns because they had basically free watering for the past 3 to 4 months. It's worth noting that the governor has lifted the emergency order. Nearly all of our water retailers will remove their stage 2 of the water shortage contingency plan and move to a 0 and or a 1. And it's important to note that because under the emergency order, everybody was limited to 2 days outdoor watering per week. And our retailers, because of the regulations, were enforcing that and promoting that. That will not be there any longer, no matter what we do at this point to promote and educate conservation. So we can anticipate additional outdoor irrigation. And I think it's safe to say, even if we have a wet year next year, it's hard for us to believe that we would have a wet year like we did this year, which was historic. So we do anticipate somewhat of a rebound, but to Director Alvarez's point, if we're looking at the trends, we don't think we'll get back above 100, 101, 102. We're still projecting to maintain that sum of and a large portion of those savings. And I think that's why we've recommended budgeting for 95,000.
And I agree in some part too, because I mean, this winter, even today, in the last 3 days have been very strange. It's kind of a fluke. It's cool weather as we speak. But the other thing is we have the issues where we're having to utilize potable water that can't always anticipate with the Hyperion situation and others. So the trend I know is down and should stay hopefully under 100,000. Seems like this is a reasonable estimate. Appreciate what Director Alvarez is saying, but I mean, I don't know if we bring back 2 options to look at, 95 versus 91, or continue moving forward with the way it's funded at this time.
I think if we were to look at the trends of Metropolitan Water District and other agencies around us, we do believe that we have done an amazing job. And I personally have been extremely excited to see us hit this low point. But naturally, I see the trends, and I think most people are budgeting for an increase in the next year.
Oh, yeah. And on that note, and I've seen what some of the other water districts are looking at, and they seem to be happy that their water sales are going to go back up, which I think is very unfortunate. It was a really tough last year they all went through, but so I think we stay the course. But I think this number seems reasonable. Go ahead, Director Lee.
All right. That's okay.
Keep it little, this is enough. Keep going.
All right.
So the last thing I wanted to point out on page 22,
Yeah.
is, we talked about the rates, and Margo will go into more details of that later on, but I did want to point out that you'll see at the bottom, you have the imported water rate for the barrier, specifically the West Coast.
Mhm.
We do have an agreement with WRD on that, so that number is different because it is set by agreement. So I just wanted to point that out if you noticed. It's a different. Move on to page 23. This is what the rates would look like, assuming the 7%. So the current rate, which is shown in that first column of numbers today at 1587, Met will have, well, let me back up a second. Met will not increase their rate until September, so the tier one rate stays the same. January, thank you. Did I say September? I don't know where that came from, excuse me, January 1. So for July 1, what would happen, assuming the 7% is the rate that we go with, we would move from 257 to 275. That would then make our total rate, tier one rate at 1605. And then in January 1st, Met would have their rate increases go through. So we'd move from the 1209 to the 1256. And then the readiness to serve charge, Metropolitan's RTS charge, would go from 121 to 146. And our rate for the RSC would remain at the 275. So in total, we would be at 1677. So from the current rate to 1677, if you take all that into consideration, it's an increase of 5.7%.
But we're increasing at 7%.
Yes, the
Our-
RSC would be the 7%.
If we adopt the rate as per the basic recommendation, yes, we're going to see an option later. We're going to be increasing it 7%.
Yes, that's what this scenario includes.
That's, in my opinion, a pretty high increase. I won't be supporting that. I could support around a 3% increase. But I would, at the end of the day, would not support that high rate increase. I do think that you can find some savings. I go back to the TMBR of $1 million. That will get you down closer to that 3%. I would go back to the funding for positions of the net new positions, which is close to $350,000, plus the assistant general manager position, which is another $450,000. So there you got about $700,000-800,000. And I think with a couple of other areas, we can get this rate increase to about 3% versus 7%. I would be willing to support a rate increase, and that would be my suggestion for where we should look for some of the savings. There are other places you can look for savings too, with no doubt.
That information input.
I'd like to hear the general manager's comments on that.
And I apologize, I stepped out to use the restroom, so I didn't hear the director's comments.
Okay. We're talking about the rate increase, and the budget's based on a 7% rate increase. And I said, I will not support a 7% rate increase. I could feel comfortable getting up to about a 3% rate increase. Where you could find that delta in terms of savings, one was the TMBR, it's $1 million. And the other one should be on looking at our staffing. I would not increase the staffing level from 50 to 52. And then I would add that we should get rid of the assistant general manager position. So between the two of those, you got about another $800,000. And I think that would get you closer to that 3% rate increase versus the 7%. There are other places to look for savings too, and we can look for those. My comment.
No, thank you for that. After meeting with the finance team, we talked about the recommendation of a 10%. I asked them to look below that, and they did the work that I had asked them to do and brought back a 7%. I also asked them for a 0% to look at that. My recommendation, and I think that it's a matter of being responsible for future years, that we begin to look at the 7% and even consider the 10%. And the reason for that was because of the impact of next year and what West Basin Municipal Water District will have to consider. And I know Margaret can explain it far better than myself. But we have to look at what we do today and how that'll impact us next year. And while 7% does seem high in looking at the cost of our chemicals and the current status of our water recycling program, those cuts would be significant. In terms of the staffing points that Director Alvarez made, what I would suggest is we consider just the services that a staff provides. When we reduce staff, simply we're going to have to reduce the services provided. There's a direct correlation. One person can do, so much, and two people can do so much more. And so that really is up to the board of directors as far as if you want to include those two positions. One was a historically funded public information position. So that would get us to what we were doing before, maximizing education and outreach. And the other one was in our admin department. Over the last several years, just through even increased regulations, but also activities of West Basin Municipal Water District, our admin department has just been pushed to the limits as far as what we're able to do and do well. So if we're not going to staff that second position in the admin department, we would just have to look at doing less. The idea here is, and the expectation from the acting general manager to our executive managers is that if we're going to do something, we're going to do it extremely well. And so if we're going to have fewer staff, then we're going to just have to reduce the things that we do and do everything that we do extremely well. In terms of the assistant general manager, I would just say that having served as the assistant general manager, as well as the acting and interim general manager, there's just a lot to be done. I'm not saying that it could not be done. There's just a lot to be done. I worked hand in hand with the former general manager, and we divided and conquered and did quite a bit. But I would probably point to the admin code. I think that the general manager's role is to divide and kind of manage the overhead as far as the positions that West Basin funds and places people in the right position to succeed. And so when we talk about the assistant general manager or one or two positions, I would say look at the totality of the overhead and then allow the general manager to make those decisions to achieve what is set forth by the board of directors.
At one time, we had not only an assistant general manager, but we had, I think, an associate general manager.
That is correct. And if you look at the organizational chart, that has been converted. However, the number of positions and titles, I think, are probably able to be set aside. It's just a matter of how we manage the organization, again, to maximize success. That, I believe, is the role of the general manager. And I think that that's the role of the board, is to put that general manager in a position to succeed and guide staff. Now, if we want to shrink overhead, we could look at how to do that. But the positions that might come or go, I think it is just a matter of management.
My suggestion is.
Suggestion is just one person's suggestion. Don't
That's
forget
what
that.
I will support. You can support something else.
Right.
So just making a suggestion.
Well,
Director Wade.
I've been around a little while and I do not believe that you can do more with less. I support the general manager.
Okay, so, and maybe at the end, you can put that back out there as something for consideration, but at this point, we last month or we talked about adding 2 positions versus, was it no?
We looked at no, we looked at 7. So those were the 3.
2, 7, 0. There's some dialogue on this, so hence here we are with 2. The board last year did allow staff and general manager to create the AGM position, ironically enough. So now we could look at eliminating it again, but I don't think we're in that camp, quite frankly. And then we have not made a decision on the MVR project. So I feel we have to keep it in the books until we have a policy decision on it.
Opinion.
My opinion. So.
And it's really important to note on that one, incorporating it into the budget has basically setting aside funding to be available for that. I can assure you that no decision will be made by West Basin Municipal Water District to fund that project without coming through the board and getting the board's decision on whether to do that.
We understand it.
And not gonna have a decision before the end of next month. So anyways, all right, you got what so far still is in this, and I understand Director Alvarez's spot, and so what we could do is maybe, look at that as a potential option or something, if we want to explore that further, another iteration, but, we do need, there's a number of options even here, we've got to just keep talking about, so let's continue, please.
Thank you. On to page 24, and I won't spend much time on this, but it's important to share what our Metropolitan Readiness to Serve charge will be in this next year. And then that translates to the rate that we charge. So I know you've seen this slide before, so I'll keep it very short. So Metropolitan did adopt the 767 million, excuse me, I gotta slow down, 167 million in total allocation for their collection on the RTS. Our share is at 8.04 now. So when we look at that first half of calendar year 23, second half of the first part of calendar 24, and those two combined, our liability for the next year will be almost 12.9 million. Looking at, again, our sales that we're anticipating, 95,000 on the retail, 2,000 for the Dominguez Gap. We don't charge the RTS per agreement on those injections into the West Coast barrier. So that would translate for $146 per acre foot to be able to collect that $12.9 million. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions.
And I'll just comment again, if the decision by the board is to lower your sales as it relates to your retail sales, we will have to come back and adjust this rate here, because again, we're trying to make this a pass-through. So if you go down to 91,000 acre feet for the retail, 2,000 on your for the Dominguez Gap, you're now at 93, not 97, and that's what you would then divide to get to that number. But again, 6 months here, 6 months there. I don't know what the number is, but we can, if that isn't on the table, then we would certainly need to recalculate that number as well. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
All right, so moving on to page 25. Again, we've shared this slide before. This is MWD's capacity charge. This now is the side where we collect the funds. As Margaret had indicated before, this is also a pass-through for Metropolitan, so we try to collect only what we're being charged. So you'll see the Met rate, which is shown on the left-hand side, is currently 10,600 per CSF, going up to 11,002. That's what we're charged, but we're able to charge our customers less because their peaking is different than our peaking. So the rates on the right-hand side, 9,135 is the current CSF that we charge our customers. That number would go to 9,605 beginning January 1st, 2024. But then you can see our revenues and our costs are pretty darn close, and that's how we would then pass through the cost. Questions on that? One more slide on page 26. Based on the changes that we heard through the different workshops, we've decreased our total PI and water policy budgets. So now for fiscal year 23-24, those two budgets make up what we charge for our fixed service charge. And so you'll see that for 23-24, our total collections will be $6,185,899, and that goes into effect July 1 of 2023. That's a slight decrease from the prior year. On the following slide, we just wanted to share with you how the allocation of that cost is by customer. Again, won't spend much time on it, but if you want to see what each customer would pay in 23-24, that's what's shown there. Slide 28, I think we did spend a decent amount of time on. This is your recycled water revenues. We talked about the acre feet and the rates, and then of course discussed the potential of having just, instead of a reducing tier rate, that we would have just the one rate. Moving on to the last slide as part of revenues is slide 29. These numbers should look familiar. The standby charge, which we just adopted, as Director Alvarez had mentioned, our fixed capital payments had stayed the same as what we've shared before, as well as our conservation income. The only number that on this page that changed from the last time that we were together was under that other revenue line item. Within this number, we've included the 7.3 million that we've discussed previously. And we've also included what we are estimating is going to be the external contributions from those parties that will work with us on the technical planning study. So we've included $1 million, just over $1 million there as well. So with that, that concludes the revenue side, but if there's anything more I can answer, I'd be happy to do that. I will pass it on to Margaret.
Although, before you do that, on this slide, interest income, how do you explain the big jump there?
Well, we've seen an increase in our rates, and actually we do work with our investment manager. And so we do ask them to look at our investments, look at what they're currently at and project forward. And so they do provide us this information.
Well, you can park your money today. A year ago, you were lucky if you could park it close to 1%. You can park your money today and get 4.7%.
Oh, actually, it was the money.
Yeah, you have to have money to park.
Right.
But we have money that's parked.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference in the interest rates.
Yeah, even on our liquidity, it's over 4%. We're actually nearing almost 5%. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing what you can get currently. We do understand and anticipate that the rates will start to drop towards the end of this calendar year and certainly to the second half of the year. And so, you know, we will continue to monitor that. But again, it also takes into consideration about, you know, where we use our funds. If we anticipate using more funds to pay for capital projects, you know, certainly that could have an impact on this as well. All right, so let's go on to capital expenditures. If we go to page 31, I'll just say by the numbers, here's what the numbers look like on a 5-year schedule. So 38.8 is what's anticipated in 23-24. I know we've had some discussion in the past about what those efforts are. So I won't go into detail on that, but it does also show you the costs in the next 4 years as well. You can see a significant amount in the area of R&R. But if I move forward to page 32, 32 gives you sort of more of a picture form, if you will, of what it looks like and what those specific projects are. So you can see the majority of the costs in 23-24. 14 million of that is being spent towards the PD lateral. We know the board has moved forward with some construction contract with the pipeline, and there's some other items I believe that are coming before you at some point. And so knowing that the project's moving forward, you see a fair amount of costs that are associated with that. We also have the JMM project that we do anticipate wrapping up in early part of fiscal year 23-24. And then you can see the other numbers there. I will point out on the green bar there, that $7.3 million, we call it a capital asset rehabilitation and replacement. The big number that, if you will, that's included in that is membranes. So keep in mind, those are what's required for us to be able to do. From an accounting standpoint, we're able to capitalize those dollars, certainly, but we understand that this is sort of more of an ongoing cost, if you will, to support our operations. But again, from an accounting perspective, these can be capitalized, and that's why they show up in this budget here. On the blue bars that you see on this page here, we thought we'd give you a little bit more detail because those are your R&R projects. And those are the ones that you can see are the pretty big expenditures in the following year. So if you go to page 33, it really just is to provide you a little bit more detail of where we intend to spend those dollars, be it our DLD or our Hyperion, ECL, anything relating to pipelines, our satellite plants, and our distributed control system replacement. So all of that is identified for you there. We thought that would be important just to kind of break down the blue bar, because we know that some of the questions that have come to us before is if there are any projects that are relating to our satellite funding, areas, you know, we're not going to move forward with that perhaps until we get funding. And so I know that there's a concerted effort, you know, with EJ and Barkev to meet with the refinery partners and to talk about that with them. And so we have shown in the following slide, you know, where that funding, potential funding can be. So if we don't get the funding, maybe we won't do those costs. And so that's just to give you some idea about that. So really, we share all these themes here as to lead us up to the next page, which is page 34. 34, it shows you again the breakdown of where we anticipate getting our funding. So let me start with fiscal year 23-24. So $38.8 million is the total CIP budget. We anticipating getting $7.4 million from our customers. This includes for our customers relating to the JMM project or the PV lateral, or if we have those developer arrangements that they want to do, pipelines or laterals or whatever the right term is. But what we're doing pipelines with them so that they can take recycled water. We have that reflected in customer funding. In grants, that is particularly relating to the PV lateral project. And so we have some grants from DWR that support that effort there. PAYGO, this assumes that we have that 7% increase as it relates to things. So once you take all your revenues, minus your expenses and your debt service, what's remaining is about $3.2 million. I'm going to skip the next line for just a moment. Loans is $3.9 million. Again, that has to do with PV lateral. So once we are in the position of to say, hey, we've incurred the cost and we submit that information over to DWR, we'll get that money back and we'll have that loan over a period of time. And so really to how do we round out the rest of how do we pay for the balance of those projects in 23-24? And what we're suggesting is that we would have a draw on reserves in fiscal year 23-24. And so it's about $20 million of a draw on those funds. Where we're at with that is really, we do look at a reserve fund policy, designated funds, and this really gets us down to the minimum level, if you will, of that calculation. And it tells us that, the money that we have today, if we were to draw down $20 million to support all those projects, we would have about at our minimum of our reserve balances there. So then as we move forward into the following years, again, we go through that process of understanding what is those projects and how are they being funded. You can see a small amount coming from customer funding. And again, that's from the developers on the grant. The $1.2 million there has to do with the IRWIP funding towards the Army Corps projects. And so I believe we're getting good news, or we're getting good news. I can't remember where we at with the with the IRWIP and the
$1.3 million is what was just awarded by the Department of Water Resources to the Greater LA County area, along with that conservation grant. I've been told it's not 100% official yet, but the recommended award was made last week. So we feel 100% confident that the money will come through the Greater LA County area to West Basin. So we'll have that $1.3 million.
Thank you, EJ, on that. PAYGO, depend again what you set aside for your rate increases, and then also, revenues, expenses. There's a number there. The draw on reserves is just to balance out the numbers. We'll get it to draw on CP line in a moment. I wanted just to point out that last line there, unsecured satellite facility agreement. So in the previous slide, we showed you, a breakdown of our R&R costs. There's about $8 million of satellite facility costs. And so again, we would hope that we get that funding from somebody else to offset what those costs are. So it's sort of a zero sum for us. But then where are we then for the balance of the projects? And so you can see there, similar to 25, 26, as well as 26, 27, in order to be able to do all the projects that are listed there. And again, we are really been focused in on 23, 24. Some of the efforts begin this year, and then of course carry out into future years, and some don't start until future years. You can see that we would have to draw on our CP line, not only in 24, 25, 25, 26, and 26, 27. So I believe it's just under $50 million or so that we would have to draw on the CP line that's there. So again, that is a big decision for the board to understand sort of how do we move forward with that. So before I maybe, I guess I had it later on the slide, but there are, some considerations around those projects, which is, how do we get additional grant funding? Do we change the timing of those projects? Do we really need those projects? I think the way that Barkev has shared with you in previous workshops is that these are targeted, necessary CIP projects. But again, we would have to evaluate that and determined, sort of where it is. And again, the timing could be different. You're like, I can't afford that there. Where can I be? Do I need to raise rates to make them happen? Those are future discussions that need to happen. But we wanted just to share with you, without sort of additional grants, loans, external funding, the district would be seeing us having to draw on that line. So that takes us to the end of the section, and I know Director Alvarez has questions for me. So.
Yes.
Director Alvarez.
Looking at 24, 25 and onward and talking about funding on the commercial paper line, they're borrowing $50 million. Are you looking to borrow money at?
Yeah, so certainly I did reach out to our broker on that, and rates today are around 3%. And so, they stay relatively low in that sort of circumstances. I said, well, how can I project out to the future? And he's like, I don't have a crystal ball, and I got, neither do I, but I need an answer. So we did sort of assume, in that 3% to 3.5%, I think, range for that period of time. Keep in mind too, that some of these projects that we talked about here, I think one of them is like the solids handling project. I recall listening to an engineering operations meeting where it talked about if we moved forward with that full project there, that the return on investments in like 4 years. So you're going to have O&M 4.9 years, I think it was. I think if you saw the savings, if you will, on the O&M side, certainly you don't need to go out and issue long-term debt to pay for this back. You can just take the savings that you have there. But without sort of, measuring that's there, we have not sort of made that sort of very specific assumption that's around there. And again, I think as we look to cost of service and as we look to, timing of projects, we can certainly look to see how do we make this work so we don't have to go out and issue long-term debt for this, but rather how do we make it work within our own budget? So
I'm pretty impressed if you can borrow commercial paper today at 3%.
well, again, we keep it on short term. So short-term rates are definitely lower. And again,
Like short-term rates at 3%, but that's good. They are short-term. So at the end of the day, you borrow $50 million. That will at some point convert to long-term debt.
it doesn't have to convert to long-term debt. If you had,
Yes, you can keep refinancing it on a short-term basis.
as long as you keep up your
Absolutely, I
program.
understand that well. And that's one option, but typically you end up rolling short-term debt at some point into long-term debt because you end up paying a better interest rate.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have done that here at the district, but those were long-term assets that we were saying you match your funding with the life of the asset. Again, this is a policy level discussion with the board, which is, do I want to roll our short-term debt into long-term debt? If the answer is no, then we have to figure out another way to be able to do that. Again, if we had the rebound in sales, if we had, 91 become 101 next year, you have more sales, and instead of, using it towards another project or whatever, you pay back your debt service, on your commercial paper. So that's the beauty about a line of credit, if you will, to be able to have the flexibility there, unlike, moving it to a long-term debt.
I think that we need to keep that in mind. Margaret is right. This is a policy decision. But that is a lot of debt to start taking on. And it's not like the district doesn't have a lot of debt on the books already. And there are implications to having debt and taking on additional debt. We are in an environment that's different than has been in the past. You're going to see your carrying costs for our debt service will go up. And that's just a fact of nature right now. Our interest rate's going to go back down to where they were for the last 7 years almost. I don't think that's going to be the case, but that may be. But notwithstanding, even if we have interest rates at those lower amounts and you increase your debt service or your debt by about $50 million, you're adding about 25% of additional debt, the debt you're already carrying. So I think it's just a discussion, but these are some of the numbers to keep in mind as we think about what we're gonna do and where we can afford to spend money, what we actually have to spend money on, versus what, would be a nice idea, but it's not an absolute necessary idea. Or need, I should say, not idea, an absolute necessary need. So we need to be very careful there. And then I think I understand it, but just explain to me again, the unsecured satellite facility agreements.
Yes, so what we asked the engineering team to do was to identify those projects that were specifically laid out for improvements over at our satellite facilities. So with our refineries. And so with those projects, we've heard from the board that we will move forward with those projects when we have some funding associated with it. And so it's sort of to offset, if you will, that those costs will move forward when we have the secured funding. So we pulled that aside so that you would understand that of the R&R projects, you know, there is about 20 million or so, a little more than $20 million of projects in the future that could come from our refineries.
These are the ones that would be funded by the users.
Correct, yes. If you can, yes, please.
It'd be these and potentially more. What we included here, the 5-year CIP that you see here is the ones that we prioritized. If you recall from last year, we had 2 lists. We actually had 3 lists. One was the ones that we prioritized that we recommended. That was A, table A. We had another list. This table B was a bunch of other R&R projects that are mostly also related to satellite facilities. Then there was table C, a bunch of recycled water expansion projects, purple pipe expansion projects that we have put to the side. When it comes to the refineries and their potential funding for R&R projects, these are the ones that we put as high priorities, and that's equivalent to the 20-some million that you see here. But there's a list, an additional list that's close to $70 million of other potential ones related to the satellite plants that if we look into the future, those are additional investments that the refineries may want to make as well.
Back to the clarification, these are the ones that would be funded by the user, by the refineries. So those, if they come to pass, will only come to pass if we do get the funding.
Right.
In those, is that 100% of the cost for those, or that is some percentage, but not 100%?
Of the CIP projects that you're identifying for satellites, are they 100%? Is it a 1-for-1?
In other words, let's say you build $8 million, the $8 million that you're gonna get in payment back from the refinery. Is that $8 million 100% of the cost? Or the cost of those projects is $12 million, and we're gonna get $8 million because their contribution is 75%, not 100% of the project costs.
We will seek a full reimbursement of project costs, including consultants, contractors, West Basic costs, 100% of it.
We'll see, but the commitment, the way the agreements read now, be entitled to 100% reimbursement. Or are we on the hook for monies above and beyond what they're gonna reimburse us for?
Depends on the agreement right now.
Well, also, I think part of it is that there are on-site facilities and then there are off-site facilities. So they are paying a portion of the off-site facilities, meaning like ECL. And then the intent is for them to pay 100% of the on-site facilities.
That is the intent, but for purposes of the budget, and I agree, that is the intent, and we have a lot of contracts that we need to get right side up instead of where we are today. And that's a big mission for the district in this, next year or so.
And if I can just clarify, again, if we, so the numbers that you see there, that, that 8 million, the 12 million, the 387,000, those we have not put into the financial forecast because we have not secured that funding. So we're showing you what the capital costs are, but we are not showing the revenue side of it. So it can be an upside to us once we secure it, but I'm not in the practice of showing, we want to show you what the costs look like, but I want you to know that it does not include the revenues, because it can sort of impact, if you will, your discussion around rates and charges going forward. But again, I think, Barcap wants to be able to share with you that there are, I think, needed projects over at our satellite facilities that are on site. And those are the costs there, and therefore those are the associated dollars that we can anticipate if we are successful in our
Dr.
negotiations.
Alvarez, going back to your question, if there's a project that only, let's say, the benefit of that project is solely for refinery A, then we will seek for refinery A to pay for the whole thing. If there's a portion of that benefit is for other customers, then it would be proportional.
I understand. I'm just saying, are we guaranteed that? Under our current agreement, I think we're hard pressed to do that. But the way you're budgeting it assuming that you're gonna get 100% reimbursement. That is
Not for this next fiscal year, but for following years, yes, we're making here the assumption that we will be.
So for 24, 25, we take that as an example, we spend $8 million on the satellite facility, we would get reimbursed the $8 million. That is the assumption in that number.
Let's move on. Page 34. Okay, so let's go to the next section.
Yeah, so let's go to page 36. And again, they'll look very similar to you, but I wanted to show you what the 10%, 7%, and a 0% looks like. Just so that for the main reason of just sort of seeing what is the impact in the following fiscal years, really in 24, 25. This next upcoming year, 23, 24, and 24, 25 are stress points. These are where the perfect storm is happening, the highest cost, the lowest revenues are happening. And as a result of that, is putting pressure on our rates. As a result of that, in the 10% scenario, if you do that there, and we showed all the other numbers there so that you can understand how much is coming from PAYGO, how much we're drawing on reserves, is there a draw on CP line? You can see there that if you do a 10% this first year, in order for us to achieve the 1.20 debt covenant that is now required by our state loan. So our legal debt covenant for our public debt, if you will, is 115. The state loan now requires us to be at a 120. So that is a new number that we got to keep in mind. 120 is what we need to get to. In order to get to a 120, we're going to need a 12% increase in the following year. Now, I'll have a slide in the end, which is, yes, we're going to make a lot of assumptions in the future years, water sales, pushback costs, reduced programming, a lot of other things to consider. But again, if we just assume things are like the same way they are today, 10% this year, 12% next year. And then in the other 3 years that are reflected there, we have a bump up on our standby revenues. In the last few years, we have an increase of over $2 million or around $2 million on the standby charge. And so as a result of that, we can have lower increases in the following years of 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28. So again, I kind of bolded the 2 line items there for really of importance. There's a lot of numbers on the page, but if you will, middle of the page, debt coverage ratio. Again, we're at a 1.54 this year, and reason where we're at that, even with the 10%, is because of that one-time revenue we talked about coming in to help us pay for projects. But the following year, 1.2 means that 12%. The following year, if we did a 5%, we get a 1.46. 1.64 and 26-27 with a 5%, and then a 1.68 with a 5%. Again, our target by administrative code within our designated funds policy states that we should target a 1.75. And again, that's another policy level discussion that the board will want to have. Is that the right number anymore, knowing where we're at? Because we have not been able to achieve a 1.75 in the last few years. With that, like I said, similar things that you'll see in the following slides. So 7%, so if you did a 7% this year, again, assuming all things sort of stay the way they need to, sales assumptions and expenses, you get a 15% in the following year, and again, followed by a 5-5-5. So again, this year, next year, really tough points. And then before we get into questions, I just want to turn you to, if we were to turn to a 0% in this fiscal year, in order to get to that 1.20 coverage in the second year, you would need to have a 23% increase. So overall, I guess what I'm saying is this year, next year, about a 23% increase. Again, to Director Alvarez's point, yes, we can make some discussions around, do we move forward with a project? Do we move forward with some study? And let me just share one last slide, and then I'll open it up for questions, which is, it's a lot. I understand 10% is a lot, 7% is a lot, 0 is even better, but it puts a lot of pressure next year. And so really, when you look at this slide here, these are the discussion points that the board needs to have around these topics here. How are we going to incorporate the cost of service study into this conversation? Because certainly that will tell us where it is. Maybe we'll pull more money into fixed revenues versus being based off of variable rate debt. And that could sort of lessen the pressure, if you will, with these increases on our reliability service charge. Our customers are still going to be billed if we put it on the fixed. I get that. But it also helps us navigate through these variability of our sales. We certainly are under negotiations right now with our recycled water customers. And so that certainly will have an impact to us and how that will be incorporated. For instance, our discussions with Torrance and Chevron, those conversations are certainly can be incorporated in there. And so we'll see what happens there. Of course, the board can consider cost reductions in operating programs. Can we afford this project? Do we want to do this study? Those are discussions for you as well. Certainly there's discussion around, we want to keep, our sales low, but, maybe after this historic, wet year, maybe 91,000 is too low, maybe 93 is the right number. Again, time will tell on that one there. So we'll have some observations there, or maybe 86 is the right number. We need to understand that. And then of course, as it relates to trying to mitigate, if you will, our need to use the commercial paper line, you can evaluate the timing of the CIP projects and see what's there. So again, just to kind of share with you, that's where we're at. Ultimately, in the end, we understand we're in a state of transition and felt that, again, if we're looking at what we need to do and with the sources that we have, we can, and staff does recommend a 7% on its reliability service charge with all the sort of expense assumptions and revenue assumptions. And that's shown here on this slide 36. And so I'll pause there because I know I shared a lot. But ultimately, in the end, we understand that this year is a very critical year. We want to understand what the impact could have to us on the second year. And then, like I said, there's a lot of things that could happen next year as you plan out your budget.
All right. Any questions, comments?
Anybody else have any comments, questions?
You too.
I'd like to be last this time. First.
I need it. You're the one that
I changed the, my first letter of my last name.
Well, you know what, look, we've talked about this quite a lot, obviously, the last handful of months. And I know the staff has worked to really maneuver and tweak things over and over again. I think a lot of the things that you've done and we've asked you to do and you've accommodated. And so I do appreciate that. It was built in now. I said before I was okay with the added 2 positions. I think there's a couple of other things that you all put in place that I'm okay with at this point. You know, I understand too that it seems that we have almost no choice but to raise some rates just with the fact that we're inheriting added costs coming from Metropolitan. Just things we just have to pass through. So we can have difference of opinion up here on this, but when I saw this earlier, I mean, I am okay with the 7%. So that's where I'm at. So I would feel that that would be the appropriate forward with for me. But with that, I'll definitely open up to my colleagues, any thoughts or suggestions at this point, comments, etc. So who wants to, besides Director Alvarez, who wants to go first? Anybody?
Yeah, thank you.
Director Williams.
Thank you. Now that EJ, Mr. Caldwell, has moved to the position of GM,
Acting GM at this time.
is he still acting?
He's
Are you
technically
still acting up?
All right,
Still
let's
act.
just-
He's an acting GM.
Well,
But anyways.
I think you're a good actor, so. I would yield to you, and I would like to hear where you stand now on the position. Because I know that you cannot do a good job with less. You can do a job with less, but it will not be the best quality. Okay, so I believe that you should have the resources that you feel that you need to do the kind of job that you would be proud of and going forward. So I am not one to like I said to do with fewer employees. I think you should have the number that you need to do the job, quality job. So on that, I would wait to get your opinion, see what you will be asking for. And everything else too has to be based on what you, as the general manager, feel that you need to do the kind of job that you will be, that you can stand behind or be proud of. Like, so that's where I am. Thank you.
I can respond right now, or
No, he
you're
doesn't.
just making a comment. Okay. Very good. Dear. Director Deere.
I think the staff has done their usual good job, and I tend to concur with most of their recommendations.
I don't think Director Gray is with us any further at this time, so Director Alvarez.
Okay,
Your turn.
when I got to this section, I have to admit, I will give you a name for creativity. This is one way to present the budget. In my opinion, I think that there are alternate ways to present the budget. So looking at just going from 7% to 0%, there is no effort made here to cut back expenses. This is all based on, let's figure out how we're going to finance that delta of having 7% less revenue. And the way that's done is by drawing on reserves. So in the 7% budget, the draw on reserve was 20.2 million. And the draw on reserves to go to the 0% is 22.2 million or 2 million. So $2 million in savings would have actually done the same thing without drawing down the reserves. But the benefit of having $2 million in savings in the budget is that as you project forward, you will also have less expenses in the future instead of making commitments to higher expenses now. And therefore, the need to raise rates 23% in year 2 and 5% thereafter versus for 7%, the need to raise rate 15% wouldn't be quite there. So it all has to do with how we want to set up our budget and how we want to present the budget. But I have to admit, I'll give you an A. I looked at it and I go, wow, I didn't think of doing it that way. But in my opinion, I think we need to look at, well, if we're gonna bring back a budget that says we're gonna reduce expenditures, or we're gonna reduce the rate increase from 7% to 3% or to 0, that needs to be done by reducing expenses, not by drawing down on reserves.
So with all due respect, I'm trying to reduce the amount of variables that you show on a budget. And so I was just trying to share with you, I couldn't agree with you more that you can cut expenses. But we have heard from this board what it is that they want to do for this agency to support its mission. And if we're going to support our mission, trying to show you what things could look like, yes, I agree. You can change your expenses in year 2 so that you don't have to have a high increase. But without any indirection, we don't have a 2-year budget. We don't have a strategic plan. We don't know what our future is going to be. All I have is based off of what we are doing today. So thank you for the accolades, I suppose, for a job well done. I'm just sharing with you what it could look like. I'm not saying that it is what it looks like because we only adopt a 1-year budget. So 23, 24, I'm saying we can do a 7%, yes, but there is work ahead for this board to understand and make policy level discussions around what they want to do for projects, what they want to do for rates, what they want their for financial metrics, what they want for strategic direction going forward. Those are in your hands. I'm just providing you information for you to make decisions. I'm not saying that's anything that's there. I'm just saying there next year, there is an impact.
Anything else?
There's always going to be an impact. I think that we as a board need to realize that we need to look at seriously our operations, where we're headed. We have a lot of unknowns. We do need to look at some serious rate reduction or expense reductions in order to keep our rates within a reasonable. We can afford to do anything we want if we want to increase our rates indefinitely. But I don't think that that's a prudent way to proceed. I do think that we need to, at some point, deal with, and I'm talking to the board, that we do need to come to an agreement as to what is a reasonable rate increase in the future and how can we maintain that. And we do need to look at the overall expenses of the district. They cannot just continue to increase. We cannot, we all want a lot, but the list of wants is great. But the list of what we can afford to do and what we absolutely need to do is different from our wants. And sometimes we cannot have our wants. So we need to be very sensitive as to the implications of saying, hey, this is all good, etc. We do need to deliver a very high quality product, but we need to deliver that product at an affordable rate. And we need to keep in mind that at some point, rates do matter. People do pay for these things. People are concerned, and not everyone supports just saying, yeah, I can afford that much more. There's a lot of people, if we ask them, even though I've heard the argument many, many times that on a per ounce basis, there isn't anything cheaper in the world than air. We sell water at a very low rate. That is true. But at the same token, you talk to people how much they pay for their water, and there are a lot of people that say, why are my utility rates so high? And why are my water rates specifically so high? So there is a balance, but we do need to keep that in mind. I don't think we can always just look at continue to increase the expenses when there is an opportunity to look at saying, is that something that we absolutely need? That, where I would like this board to really think about things. And I understand that there's a lot of differences in opinion, but that's my opinion.
You speak on this? We already did see. Yeah, I let him go last.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have what, one more slide, I believe, right, in this?
That is correct. It is the next steps. So if we go to that slide there. And on that next steps, we just have a couple more items to do. Next week, Tuesday, we have our customer agency workshop. We have scheduled it so that they can attend it virtually. We did send out the invite and we are resending it just to see if we can get some additional RSVPs there. And then with that, the board will then, at its next regular scheduled board meeting, look to adopt the rates and the budget, which is scheduled for June 26th. And with that, we are at the end of this workshop.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll be letting you by 4:30.
So that's,
That was my goal.
no more questions, no more comments?
More questions for you.
Not for me, but,
That's right.
no, not for you, oh, not for you. No, I mean, thank you, and thank you, Margaret, for all your work and look, at the end of the day, board members we all have to just rely on good, competent, professional staff. I mean, I'm not an expert on all the financials. I have to rely on you all to bring us information. Yes, we push back, we get our, some questions and some things that you guys look at and adjust, but it doesn't even matter who's ultimately in these seats or these seats. I mean, we got to rely on professional staff. So, I can have my issues on certain things, but I can't really come in and tell you the nuance of how to do the job. I think anybody at any city is playing the same boat, right? So, I understand, you're going to be leaving us, you're retiring. And Mary Ann's going to leave us. So, no matter who's in these roles, we are very dependent on staff to help lead us in the right way. Most of us are not going to be able to be qualified to come in here and tell you exactly how to do your job. Just want to say that. And also the fact that, yeah, we are relying on a general manager or AGM in this case, and whomever else is running this operation to give us the best advice we can make. And now a lot of these things are projections that, quite frankly, next year and the year after, we have no clue what's going to happen. We are in a lot of discussions on various issues right now. So, I have a strategic plan. We are going to be working on that. We are in the midst of this water rate study. It has been very difficult last handful of years with the pandemic, with different staff changes, with different board dynamics, etc. So I will say that personally, trying to get through all this with you all, I'm trying to make it the best that we can make it as we go along. And I want to say I do appreciate the work. But in the end, we have to rely upon good advice from our staff and the consultants and whomever. So just know that. I know it's difficult, but I don't think almost any elected official in the region could come into their role. A handful of exceptions maybe to tell someone else how to completely do the job. Anyway. So we can all have difference of opinions, and the staff has to bring back things for us to look at. We can work with that. So lastly, on all of this, I mean, as we get some things finalized with leadership, et cetera, no matter where that goes, the board is committed, in my opinion. We are committed to get that strategic plan put together. We're committed to figure out where we need to put the resources, and staff show that to you. So, kind of get there. Okay. All right. So with that, I do want to say thank you. Thank you for all this work. So it sounds like we won't be seeing any more of this again until the board meeting.
We'll have the draft budget document as well as the water rate resolution at the Finance and Administration Committee. That's on June 21st.
Okay.
And then that will be there.
Got it.
But it will be based off of there. So.
Because usually we have it one more time.
Correct.
right, so with that, let's see, there's no closed session. Director's comments and future agenda items. Anyone have any comments?
Forward to the final product.
You know, I do have a comment because of the fact, just the way the calendar's working at this moment. And, you know, and I know I've talked to Mr. Caldwell about this, and I probably said it at one of the meetings, but, you know, our Metropolitan Caucus meeting, I think we're doing better to have, you know, some really good dialogue in those meetings. We are, you know, having good guests. But I am really, personally, I'm just disappointed that we're not getting some of the partners that used to participate with us. And I know I've already said this in the past, but a number of our cities are not sending the public works people or representatives to these meetings. They're not on Zoom. I don't know if they watch these videos later. I don't know what more we can do to get better participation at these caucus lunches. Not even all the directors show up to the lunches, quite honestly, sometimes. So, you know, here's a thought I had. Number one, you know, I was in Torrance the other day and one of the water commissioners saw me and I had told them about it. And I know Director Lefebvre usually comes, but I would love it, you know, at EJ, if you reach out to the Torrance Water Commission, you know, they can watch it virtually. They can be here in person. Please reach out to the cities that used to send folks and maybe understand why they're not. Because I do think it's valuable. It is on video, but if we're not getting the participation, I think we need to step back and look at that for the caucus meetings, because
Let's have a discussion about that. I'm happy to obviously tweak the MWD caucus meeting. I thought over the last 2 months, we actually had some pretty good participation. City of Long Beach was very active and engaged on the issues. It was nice to have them there. We've had MODOC and.
well, let me interrupt you. I mean, that's great, but the problem is we're getting, so Long Beach comes up and people from Orange County come up. But a lot of the cities that, you know, where's Lomita? Where's El Segundo? Where's Manhattan Beach? They're not even on this. And I'm not saying this in a mean way to you. I'm just saying, I don't understand where these folks have gone to. Why are they not participating? So.
I think the illness problem caused it. What do you call the disease everybody got?
Pandemic?
The COVID thing,
Yeah.
throwing everybody off. We're still rebounding from that situation. It's a good point.
Yeah. President Houston, let us check, because I'm just throwing this out there. We've actually had great communication with the West Basin Water Association. I believe the city of Manhattan Beach and possibly the city of Lomita have actually been attending virtually our MWD caucus meeting. I know Ms. Luz Vargas has been participating in quite a bit of West Basin activities of late, her and her staff. So let us check on that. We can look to see who is online for those, because I thought the numbers were actually pretty decent.
Yeah, but I haven't seen Inglewood. I haven't seen El Segundo. I don't know where some of these, you know, folks have disappeared to. And, you know, I know a lot of effort's put into these meetings and they have been really good topics the last couple of months. So I've reserved my opinion about it, but I have to say, if people are not interested in showing up to these meetings, then maybe we don't hold them anymore. Because, I thought they were valuable. I think people are working hard, but if we're not going to get the audience, then we can rethink it. Okay, but let's give everybody a shot.
How about the West Basin Water Association? Is it back on a regular schedule now?
So they are meeting on a regular schedule. However, their in-person meeting is only every other month. So they do virtual meetings once, and then in person and virtual. So they rotate out.
So, and since I think the next one is June 7th, that's the date I saw in my calendar. But so we have, you know, because the next week's a holiday, of course, on Monday. So, you know, let's give this next month, June 7th, a shot. And if that's the date it is, let's see if we can get better participation, whether they're physically here or they're online. But, you know, there comes a point where we're getting people driving all the way here from Metropolitan and other locations to speak to us. And if we're not going to have folks showing up, then you know, why would I show up? We're getting a little flustered. So I would really like to ask staff, do your best to see what we can do, because in the next 2 or 3 months, we might reevaluate how we do that. That's my opinion. Anyways, All right, thank you very much to everybody, and with that, we are adjourned.